Folks, welcome back to Bloomberg Africa. This is Chris coming to you from central Pennsylvania. More disturbing, horrific news out of the gangster's paradise of South Africa, where the African National Congress's callous attitude towards rural insecurity is disturbing, and at some point one must begin to question whether it simply violates human rights. It certainly abrogates their responsibility to provide for the safety and security of South Africans. The latest situation, a wheelchair-bound man has his hands tied behind the wheelchair, and he's strangled to death on his remote farm in KwaZulu-Natal. 46-year-old Neil McKay, who was handicapped as a consequence of a previous farm attack 20 years ago, which left him, after he was shot, disabled and wheelchair-bound, living alone on his farm over the weekend of the 9th through the 11th. Apparently, after the farm manager and the staff left Friday evening, they broke into his office shed, cleaned out the safe, drug him in his wheelchair back into the bedroom, tied his hands behind the wheelchair, and then strangled him to death. These are not human beings. These are vile slime. And the fact that Bheki Cele and the African National Congress continue to deny the existence of this horrific crime or attribute it to anything other than mere regular crime is disgraceful and inhumane. It's well past the time that the world begin to take notice of brutal slayings taking place in South Africa. This is carnage that is wholly unnecessary. It requires merely some adults in the political sphere to step up and take responsibility for these actions and begin policing the country in a proper fashion. Who would murder a man in a wheelchair? What kind of coward would murder a man in a wheelchair, tie his hands behind his back so he can't even struggle for his own life? It's disgraceful. Disgraceful. Apparently his dogs attempted to save him, and they were slashed pretty badly. I don't know if the dogs passed away or not, but Neil McKay, 46, dead, murdered on a farm in KZN. Another victim of the African National Congress's obliteration of the liberation struggle. This is not what the liberation struggle is about, not even remotely. Disgraceful conduct. Well, this event, this horrific murder by cowardice, is related to an event that took place just a couple of days prior. On the 6th of April, the economic freedom fighters released a press statement about the 6th of April, in which they point out that the 6th of April is the day that Jan van Riebeck arrived in the Western Cape and established a refitting station at the Cape of Good Hope. This comes from the mouthpiece of the economic freedom fighters, Vuyani Pambo. And this seemingly unrelated event is directly related to what is happening in rural South Africa and to minorities. No, I'm not claiming the economic freedom fighters have anything to do with this brutal slaying, not even remotely saying that. What I'm saying is the fact that this race hustling statement, this racist narrative can be spoken without any consequences in South Africa and no one called to account for it. The false narrative, the fictional repainting of history, the distortion needs to be exposed for what it is, because it is this narrative that convinces low information, uninformed, poorly educated South Africans that it's okay to murder other people, that it's okay to judge people based on their skin pigmentation, not on their content or their character. Well, I judge the leadership of the economic freedom fighters on their conduct and on their character, both of which are reprehensible and vile. This is the statement in part from the economic freedom fighters just 2 days before, the sort of language that contributes to what's happening in South Africa. This is the day racist white settler minority arrived on our shores by the economic freedom fighters, Vuyani Pambo, who was a member of parliament. Anniversary of Jan van Riebeck's landing in 1652 inflicts pain in souls of African peoples past and present, say the fighters. The EFF marks the 6th of April as the day the original sin was set in motion against African people when racist white minority settler arrived on our shores and committed the most despicable crime against humanity. On this day in 1652, Jan van Riebeck and his band of criminals landed what was known as the Cape of Good Hope and pursued the racist and capitalist agenda of colonial conquest and subjugation of black people in the land of their birth. It is this day that inflicts pain in the souls of African people in the past and present, as our very reality today is determined by that fateful arrival of a genocidal people who have no regard for the life of African people. It is because of this very day that this white minority has engineered a country that serves them alone today because of the legacy of colonialism. Black people live in shacks, are servants in suburbs, and are helplessly at the mercy of white people in the corporate sector in all aspects of society. In a separate tweet on Twitter, The leader, Julius Malema, Juju, of the Economic Freedom Fighters tweeted, "The legacy of 1652 lives on. Our continued landlessness is a testament to that." Well, let's just take a little look about this. What's happening here? Jan van Riebeck established a refitting station. The only people he encountered were Khoi and San, who are not black Africans. They're not Bantu peoples, the original inhabitants in the region when others began to arrive. If they want to celebrate the 6th of April as the day that Jan van Riebeck arrived and portrayed as the arrival of a racist, genocidal group of people, perhaps we should take a look at the year 521 and begin marking the year 521 as a band of racist, expansionist, colonialist African peoples began to arrive and displace, as they crossed the Limpopo, displaced the Khoi and San throughout southern Africa, murdering, raping, looting, and pushing them to the margins into the Kalahari Desert, stealing their lands, stealing their cattle, and wiping them out. Is that accurate? Well, there's a fair amount of accuracy in that statement. So perhaps the year 521 should be celebrated as the arrival of the Bantu peoples crossing the Limpopo, or thereabouts. We don't have an exact date or day because they failed to leave records to cover their crimes. Ooh, that was an intentional sarcastic comment. Now, for all of you bigots, racists, and haters out there, you should not infer in any way that my sardonic commentary that I just made says anything negative about black South Africans. It does not. I'm simply exposing the hideous lunacy of the EFF and their idiotic statements about the Cape of Good Hope in 1652. Despicable crimes against humanity. Would that include tying a wheelchair-bound man's hands behind his back and strangling him to death? Would that include hanging, stabbing, beating to death a 21-year-old farm manager, not even a farm owner? Would that include the brutal murder of a blind farmer in his shed? Would that include slicing the throat and murdering a 26-year-old Indian woman, 4 months pregnant? Would that include shooting in the head a black cattle farmer in the Free State, leaving him for dead? He survived for 4 months in a coma, only to survive the coma, and then a couple months later die from the wound inflicted upon him. Is that the kind of crimes against humanity the Economic Freedom Fighters are talking about? Would it include the 60 murders today, almost all committed by black South Africans, some by coloreds, occasionally by whites, but virtually all by black South Africans? Are those the crimes against humanity that he's talking about? Mr. Vuyani Pambo? Perhaps you need to go back to university and actually learn a little bit about the actual history of South Africa and stop lying about it. As far as the arrival of Jan van Riebeck in 1652 inflicting pain in the souls of African peoples past and present, what are you talking about? The Afrikaner are African. The mere fact that you don't recognize this shows your bias, your bigotry, and the race hustling going on with inside the EFF. Born in Africa, of Africa, we're talking about people who have as much as 17 generations on the continent. They're African. Your inability to recognize that is shameful. As far as Julius Malema and his legacy of 1652 living on, let's take a look at that landlessness. According to the government's own land audit from November of 2017, there were 40,494 black landowners, farm owners, in South Africa in 2017. That represents 22% of all listed farms. Now, with the black majority in the country being 80%, that doesn't exactly match their percentage population. But why should it match? It could be more, it could be less. That's a distorted narrative, landlessness. Land is freely available to any South African that wants to buy it. As far as blacks living in shacks, that's also a fairy tale. Has anyone been to Soweto lately? It's quite come up, quite lovely Tony neighborhoods in parts of Soweto. As far as blacks living in shacks today, 27 years of post-colonial, post-National Party, ANC instilled apartheid. You blame the African National Congress for the abysmal education system in South Africa, lack of services, children dying in pit latrines in the Eastern Cape, textbooks never delivered because corrupt, venal patronage, black economic empowerment companies not delivering textbooks for children. You can blame the ANC for its moronic 15th century concept that the way to prosperity is for people to own land and to farm it in small-scale farms, which they own as a government and give you lease to. That is not a path to prosperity. While the world takes people out of agriculture because of mechanization and automation, fewer and fewer people are in agriculture. They move into things where you can actually make a decent living and make money. They want to put 1 million black South Africans on the land. Seems to me the ANC is the party of serfdom and servitude, not of prosperity and freedom. Once again, folks, disgusting, vile murder of yet another South African, this time a white South African, Neil McKay, murdered at the hands of cowards in KZN. Will the carnage in South Africa ever end? It appears not, so long as the African National Congress rules the country. It is time for white, black, and brown South Africans to recognize that the African National Congress of today is not the party that had a role in the liberation struggle. It is a party of corrupt, cowardly, venal politicians who are self-absorbed, who care only about themselves. I gave the African National Congress a pass for many years, telling people that there were legitimate, patriotic South Africans of all races in the ANC who cared about the development of South Africans. But if they remain in the ANC, they are hiding and they are silent as the racist, the bigots, the radical economic transformation, lunatics run the show. And South Africa is headed for a very, very sad end of poverty and suffering. Vote the African National Congress out of power. Whomever you vote for, the UDM, the EFF, God forbid, the Freedom Front Plus, the DA, the Inkatha Freedom Party, whatever you vote for, don't vote for the ANC. They have not earned anyone's votes. They're a disgrace to the liberation struggle. They're rewriting of history. They're co-opting of history, trying to take credit for the black consciousness movement for which they had no role in. That was Steve Biko and his friends, not the ANC. Yet they're teaching generations of South Africans that the ANC came up with the black consciousness movement. Total fraud and lie. They take total credit for the Freedom Charter, for which they played virtually no role in, written largely by white Jewish South Africans, the 1955 Freedom Charter. The ANC acts as if Mkhonto we Sizwe won some major battle against the South African Defense Force, when in fact they killed more of their own people in Quatro, in Angola, than they killed members of the South African Defense Force. Their contribution to the conflict was virtually non-existent, yet they're hailed as heroes and veterans. It's a joke. The African National Congress, which was once a proud political party formed in the early part of the 20th century, has become a sad reflection of a typical African independence movement that has the inability to govern. It's a disgrace. And the fact that they have laws that ban free speech over threatening people, over injuring people's reputation, yet they allow this nonsense from the economic freedom fighters on an endless basis, time after time, calling white people racist by simply using the term white people rather than calling out an individual. The economic freedom fighters engages in race hustling and racism. And they need to stop it. They need to stop it. Their lies are hazardous to the health of South Africans, and they're not called to account. The Brackenfell protest, in which they were authorized 100 people to show up, between 3,000 and 5,000 thuggish people showed up with golf clubs, pangas, and knob carries and threatened school children, who fortunately weren't at the school because of the demonstration. Violating the court order, none of those people were in the docket for violating. Nobody in the economic freedom fighters who applied for that permit was brought to trial for their actions in the events that took place in November, the 20th November at Brackenfell. Not a single person. Not a single member of the economic freedom fighters charged with inciting violence that led to the arson in the Free State. 92,000 hectares of land burned in the Free State after the economic freedom fighters at Senegal on the 16th of October exhorted their followers to terrorism, domestic terrorism. But I stray from the topic. Yet another shocking, horrific, cowardly murder in rural South Africa, as Neil McKay, a 46-year-old disabled farmer confined to a wheelchair, has his hands bound behind his back, and he's strangled to death by cowards. May God rest his soul, and may peace be upon his family and that community. And South Africans, white, black, brown, wake up. Wake up, South Africa. The African National Congress doesn't have your interest at heart. It cares only about 500,000 cadres, not the other 59.5 million South Africans. God bless, and take care, folks.